Okay, thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you today. I'm going to talk about some preliminary results from my future fellowship that I've been working on for the last 4 years. It's about leaving the farm, exploring the long-term drivers of farm exit in the Murray-Darling Basin. And just to jump straight to the conclusion, yes, climate change is playing a part, and a very significant part. So the reason I'm concentrating on the Murray-Darling Basin, it's an area that's seen a lot of reform, especially in the past 100 years. It's an area of great importance to Australia. It's known as our food bowl. It has our largest amount of irrigators within this area, and it produces 60% of food within Australia. This slide is just basically giving you a little bit of history to show the path of water reform in this area. 2012, we passed the Murray-Darling Basin Plan with the aim to return the basin to sustainable levels of water extraction. And we're doing that through two main policies, mainly buying water back from irrigators and subsidising irrigation on and off-farm infrastructure. So, farm exit has been an issue in Australia and especially within the Murray-Darling Basin for a very long time. This graph is just showing from the 1970s onwards. It shows that farm exit has always been happening. We've got falling farm numbers across all Australia and particularly within our Murray-Darling Basin states. So the red line is farm numbers and the green line is terms of trade. Terms of trade is a really good signal of the prices that our farmers are getting. So you can see that both are on a downward spiral. Okay, so one thing I just want to make clear, farm exit is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so economists will often argue that exit is needed because you need economies of scale increasingly in farming, and the exit of farmers allow neighbours to buy out fellow neighbours and increase their land holding. We also need a turnover in terms of we need younger and more innovative farmers coming in, so farm exit can allow for this. On the other hand, communities are very adamant that they do not like farm exit, or maybe a certain level of farm exit is okay, but rates above that they feel is very detrimental to rural communities, and they associate this with falls in education and health services, which they feel affect their rural viability in general. So we know that there continues to be a wider social debate about what drives farm exit, especially in the Murray-Darling Basin. And one of the outcomes of this is that beliefs about farm numbers and job numbers can drive policy. So we've seen an example recently, the Northern Basin Review by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. They did a little bit of economic modelling. I would use that term very loosely, and the recommendation was to cut the water recovery target in the Murray-Darling Basin from 390 gigalitres to 320 gigalitres, and to stop recovering water through buying back water entitlements to only focus on and off-farm irrigation infrastructure. Okay, so this is a consequence of what they feel is the bad consequences of farm exit within rural communities. This is just another example of how farm exit is used by a number of groups. This is the Speak Up Now group. It is often reported in newspapers, especially within rural communities, and it talks about the really bad consequences of farm exit, and they are associating it with reductions in water diversions and the basin plan for the impacts within communities. And this is what's known as a grassroots campaign, and these campaigns have helped drive changes in current water national policy. Okay, so in actual fact, do we really understand what drives farm exit? There's been very little work done here in Australia. I've done some modelling on farm exit intentions, but this is only using survey data from 2006 onwards. Current economic modelling that's been used to inform water reform policy, it's only concentrated very much on a shorter time frame. They use 2001 to 2011. They assumed proportional linear assumptions between water use and farm production. What I mean by that, they say if water entitlements are reduced by 20%, they automatically assume a 20% reduction in farm production and then the so-called impact on farm jobs and numbers. There was no consideration of the wide impacts on farm exit, and so that's one of the reasons that drove this study, was to try and understand what are the really long-term drivers of farm exit in the Murray-Darling Basin, and specifically what role does water play in this. So this is just giving you a bit of a background about the data that our study collected. The Murray-Darling Basin, both southern and northern, was the focus of our study. Our time period is 1991 to 2011, using ABS population and ag census data at the statistical local area. I would have liked to have gone back further, but it took me 2 years just to get ABS to concord all the data I needed, so I could do a panel model over time, and there was absolutely no way they were going back before 91 because they felt the quality of data wasn't good enough. So what we also collected, so we wanted to try and work out, well, you know, what are the drivers of farm exit? We also collected information on water diversion. So this is within each local area, how much water is being diverted for irrigated agricultural production. Similarly, we know the movements of trade of water. So water markets have been present ever since the 90s, and we know how much water has moved in and out, both permanent and temporary, within statistical local areas, to say, well, what impact is water trade having on farm numbers? Commodity prices, we weighted for each particular type of production within a statistical local area. We know that commodity prices are a very important driver, and so we needed to collect all that information. We had other information on rainfall, soil moisture quality, types of production, mean temperature, and then some kind of socioeconomic community characteristics, such as how many health and education professionals are employed. CEFA is a disadvantage index of a community, the year, unemployment, average age, population, etc. So all this took us a very long time to collect all this data to be able to model with. Now, these graphs are just showing you the 5 yearly snapshots from 1991 to 2011. The red is indicating areas that are losing farm numbers, and green is indicating those who are gaining farm numbers. So the very important point that these figures actually show is the enormous amount of variability. So there is no one time period that's exactly the same. It's all quite different. So this is an early indication that there is multiple influences on farm exit. This figure is the whole time period, the 20-year time period. The red shows areas which have lost a lot of farms, and green, you can see there's not many green. So over this 20-year period, there's very few statistical local areas that have actually gained farms in that time period. Okay, so I'm going to talk very briefly about our methodology. We tested a whole heap of different models. In particular, we're interested in trying to understand, is there spatial effects within our areas, because we think one statistical local area is impacted on what's going on around it. If you only did fixed effect two-way panel models, then, and there was actually the influence of spatial dependence within our models, it would lead to inconsistent and biased results. So the spatial Durbin model, we also tested a spatial order correlation model, but the most robust model seems to be the spatial Durbin model, which does indicate we have spatial impacts across statistical local areas. So it's all about how do we understand farm exit changes within local areas, and how is it spatially and temporally varying over time. So I don't have that much time because it's only 12 minutes, so I'm just going to give you the highlights. These are the key results that are very significant, that are impacting farm exit over time. So farms are increasingly leaving in areas that are experiencing, one, an increased average daily maximum temperature. So this is the climate change impact over time. It's a very large impact on whether if we're losing farms from certain areas. If there's increased SLA population and increased urbanisation, these are factors that are also driving out farms. So urbanisation is decreasing farm numbers in statistical local areas. Increased unemployment. So this is a kind of a demand factor. So the more that an economy is depressed, the more likely you're going to have farms leaving. This is related to decreased commodity prices. So these are the prices that farmers are receiving for the good that they're producing within local areas. The more that prices are falling, the more likely that farm numbers are going down. And finally, average industry land areas. This is kind of the economies of scale. The more farms are increasing over time, the more likely you're going to have falls in the numbers of farms over time. So this research on the long-term drivers of farms in the Murray-Darling Basin is supporting previous work that we've done. When we actually look at surveys of farms, we know that those with very high debt levels and poor rates of return are the ones being forced out, and they're more likely to be forced out in times of drought. That is when often the trigger for them. So we're finding this with our kind of time series influence of commodity prices over time. The more that farmers are facing falling commodity prices, the more likely that they're actually going to be leaving within the Murray-Darling Basin. You may have noticed that in the previous slide, when I talked about what was significant in driving farm exit, we found no relationship between water diversions in an area and the rate of farm exit change over time. There was just no significance, okay? The significance was with climate change. It wasn't with water diversions. Now, I know people can say, well, it's because we're not measuring water diversions very well. We all know that there's issues with the current model there, but at this stage there is no relationship between water diversions and total farm exit. Urbanisation is definitely, as we get increased urbanisation within a statistical local area, you're going to see a fall in the number of farms in the area, and that was another very much large influence on farm exit. So the key point that I think is very relevant for this session, because it's a climate change session, is that the more we're going to get increases in temperature over time, the more we're going to have farm numbers falling. So this is definitely an issue, because I think climate change can't be ignored, especially within the Murray-Darling Basin situation. It's going to have implications for A, our number of farms, B, the water inflows within the Murray-Darling Basin, and falling reliability of water entitlements, which is going to have a run-on effect on all farmers within the basin. The second point that I want to make is good policy depends on high quality science. Now, we often hear a lot about physical science, but we don't often hear enough about economic science, and I think that current water economic studies that have been relied on to make national water policy decisions are inadequate. They do not cover the myriad of influences within communities that they should, and they are leading to bad policy advice. So I would like to finish by saying that, in my opinion, and I should say this is the opinion of many other water economists across Australia, there is absolutely no basis to move away from buyback of water entitlements in terms of we're trying to get Murray-Darling Basin to be a more sustainable level of extraction, and by doing so buying back water entitlements is a much better way of doing it than subsidising on and off farm irrigation infrastructure, which actually can lead to path dependency and lock-ins for many farmers, and it's not a socially neutral policy. The final advice that we recommend is policy should concentrate on what ensures farm adaptation the most, and to remove exit barriers. We have to recognise that farm exit will continue. It's not something we can change simply because we can't control commodity prices and we can't control production in the rest of the world, but we should be able to have policy that removes exit barriers and minimises the harm for farmers when they're facing that choice. And final point is I would just like to acknowledge ARC funding for this research through Discovery and Future Fellowship grants. It can be very hard to get long-term funding to be able to do the sort of research that we have here. So thank you.